Joining me today is a sports journalist from the state of Illinois. His work has been featured in many publications over the years, including Fansided and bjpenn.com. You can also catch him at many MMA events. He is a credentialed member of the press, and he joins me right now. His name is Zain Bando. Mr. Bando, welcome to my show. It's an honor to get the opportunity to talk to you.
Absolutely, Tyler. Thank you very much for having me on. And I think what you're doing to get all of our names out there in the MMA media space specifically is great. And I'm glad to join the trend, if you will. So thank you for that.
It is my honor. And I first want to start with you, sir, and just simply ask, what is it about the journalism space that interested you? It's something that I found I kind of just fell into. I didn't have a journalism background. I fell into this, but what about you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have a physical disability, so I knew at a pretty young age that I wasn't going to be able to play sports. So I kind of wanted to do everything I could to stay around them. It kind of started, in middle school and high school. It kind of started with, doing public address work for the basketball teams at my middle school and high school. And then that kind of morphed into some social media roles as well. And then in college at Illinois and now at Northwestern, at Medill, I'm now a journalism student there too and getting my master's. So it's just something that's been kind of ingrained in me from a young age and something I always wanted to pursue and just something that would allow me to stay around sports. And my MMA fandom kind of happened by accident, but it happened for a very good reason. So that's kind of a brief synopsis of kind of how I got started in being such a sports fanatic turned journalist, if you will. So
Is there a difference in how you cover a sports team, like a basketball team, for example, versus an actual individual mixed martial artist? Do you have a different approach for either of those?
yeah, that's a good question. I think when you're covering a basketball team or a football team, you have to look at it from, multiple layers. It's obviously a team sport. So there's multiple responsibilities where you could cover, multiple angles of a football game or a basketball game in terms of, okay, if the quarterback, didn't make this mistake, team X, wins or loses the game. Whereas, when you're covering a human to human chess match, like an MMA fight or a boxing match, it's you versus the other man or the other woman. And the only person in there to protect you is the referee. So, yeah, you're more so covering it from a very individualistic basis. But I think the same principles of journalism and interviewing and that sort of thing, still apply no matter who you're speaking to. But definitely from sport to sport, knowing the terminology and knowing what you're getting into is very important.
Knowing what you're getting into, I think that is so critical. And it wasn't something that I was cognizant of when I began. And I found out, I'll say almost kind of on the fly, some of the, I won't say the downside, but just the reality of it. And the reality of this space, it's deadlines. There are tight deadlines. Whether you're an independent guy like me, there's self-imposed deadlines. You'll have a story and you still need to produce this story and get it out for the world generally in accordance with a particular fight card. The other thing that's interesting about it is it's a double-edged sword. We rely on social media, we rely on YouTube, we rely on all these various outlets to push out our content. And that's great because a lot of people can access it. It's bad because a lot of people can access it. And with that territory comes haters, trolls, people that look at every single word that you say and like almost want to like be so argumentative about it. And I found even in these interviews that I'm doing on YouTube, I've gotten like nasty messages from people like, oh my, and we're not just talking about people that are like disagreeing with my take. We're talking about people that uh, just have said a bunch of rude, mean things and stuff about me. And it's like stuff that like kind of like took me off guard. And I kind of wanted to ask you, just generally speaking, whether it's constructive criticism or just like, people just being stupid in general. How do you manage criticism in your journalistic career?
Yeah, I mean, I think criticism is going to happen no matter who you are. Thankfully, I haven't gotten too much hate, but I think go about replying to the people who you think are giving an informed opinion, and you try to have a discussion with them, and the ones that, you don't want to engage, you either just ignore them or mute them or whatever. But I think, knowing that you're the person who's the expert and someone with 13 Twitter followers and maybe not even a profile picture is not, that should make you feel better about yourself, because the people, this just this doesn't just go for aspiring MMA media. This goes to aspiring journalists too. The people who you need to worry about when it comes to getting feedback on your work is the people that are working directly with you. So whether that's, a site manager, a professor, if you're going to journalism school, someone in the space that can say, okay, this is what you did well, this is what you didn't do well, this is what you need to work on, this is what you need to ignore. It's not about the people online who are going to have their opinions, because people can say whatever they want. They don't know how many hours it takes, to do something like you're currently doing, or the podcast that I produce once a week. They don't know how long it takes. So I think really just kind of, standing your ground, knowing your territory, and realizing that, not every single person on social media has the right answer for what they think of your work. And thankfully, I've not really had that experience. A lot of my feedback has been more so positive on the things that I've done, but I know as my career progresses, I'm only 23, but I know as my career progresses, it's going to get bigger and bigger, where I'm going to be faced with some pretty tough criticism, and it's going to be up to me to handle it the right way. And so far, I hope I am doing that. And I think that's the biggest piece of advice I would give to someone who's looking to go down a similar path.
You've written for some really cool places. BJPenn.com is I've had that site bookmarked for years. I've read many of your things before, and I didn't really know it at the time, but I've read several of your pieces before. Can you talk a little bit about how you got mixed up with BJPenn.com? Because that's really cool.
Yeah, thank you. It just kind of happened where, I felt like my run with Fansided MMA was at a good place, and I knew I needed something a little bit bigger, and I wanted to start getting credentialed to events. To be quite frank, I'd been working as a freelance MMA journalist for quite a few years, but had not gotten the opportunity to get credentialed to the events that I really wanted to go to. And BJ Penn welcomed me with open arms. They knew that I knew the sport well and had done some good things in the space, and they wanted me to really do what fully I was meant to do in terms of being an MMA media member. And that's kind of how it got started. I pretty much just reached out to them, got in touch with the site director, and have been there since about August of last year. And they've been nothing but awesome, and they've literally allowed me to pretty much do whatever I want and allow the MMA world, so to speak, to be my oyster. And it's just been a great experience so far. And just being able to go cover events, I think, has been the big thing for me, to get those early reps and, get a chance to meet other members of the MMA space, and, be able to go to some pretty high profile events, which I'm very grateful for. So, yeah.
Can you talk, Zan, a little bit about, and this is an interesting scenario, or that's maybe not the right word. I was hoping you could talk a little bit about pitching stories, and what people who aren't in the industry may not understand, whether you're a freelancer like you, or you work for, you're a reporter and you work for like ESPN, for example. Like, there are stories that have to get pitched, and basically what I was kind of hoping is you could explain to a novice out there who doesn't know what we're talking about, what does it mean to like pitch a story, and how do you do it successfully?
Yeah, so essentially what pitching a story means is you could be a freelancer or be a reporter for a major outlet, and you have a story idea. So you basically, you think of an idea, okay, this is what I want to go with, and then you essentially write up a proposal. Or for example, if I'm an MMA reporter, which I am, and I get, an email from a PR firm, and they basically say, hey, we have this fighter with such and such promotion. Would you like to talk to him or her? I first would have to look up the fighter, see when they're fighting, et cetera, et cetera. And then that's when I would go to my editor and say, hey, there's such and such events, such and such event coming up, a week from Saturday. Here's the fighter. He or she is such and such prospect or a champion. This is the record. This is what they've done over the last several years. They have this viral knockout or this viral submission that got a lot of traction. If we could get this exclusive, it could really help promote their fight and get more people involved in seeing it. So I think really selling the subject to me is the big key in mastering and executing, if you will, a successful story pitch. Because if you don't have those background nuggets already in your head, you're not going to be able to pitch the story successfully, and B, the story could quickly become old news and no longer relevant. So
I think that's a great advice, and it's one of those things where it's like, for example, if you want to do a story on Rampage Jackson, you better be able to answer a few questions about why. Well, why do you want to do a story on Quentin Rampage Jackson? Well, and then for me, it's like, I want to do a story on him because he's involved in the UFL now. So you're talking about an MMA legend that's involved in a new upstart promotion that's giving healthcare to fighters, and their second or third card ever is going to be in Tennessee. Those are the things that your editor is going to want to hear about before you just say, like, hey, book me a plane ticket to Tennessee because I want to go do a story on Quentin Rampage Jackson.
yeah, exactly. That is very well said. And it's also one of those things, I can get into this a little bit later, but it's also one of those things where, pitching stories, especially in a profession like combat sports, is an investment. Not every single story, or every single story idea I get sent by someone who works in PR is going to be something that I write. I actually have to go in and see, okay, why is this relevant? I have to Google them and see if they've been covered before. If they've never been covered before and they're not getting traction for people to read him or her, why would I do a story when I could go do a story on 5 other fighters where they're competing that weekend, and a lot of people know that eyeballs are going to be on them. So I think it's just playing apples to apples, oranges to oranges, that kind of thing.
I kind of want to talk a little bit about the dirty side of the media space. Um, there's a lot of things that I see on Instagram, on Twitter, almost every single week. I see a lot of misleading headlines. I see clickbait. I see even like quasi reputable promotions that are putting out like thinly veiled like hit pieces on fighters. I won't say the name of the publication, but anyone who's watching this will probably know. There was a not so flattering piece put out about Terrence McKinney when he got knocked out recently. You probably know exactly who I'm talking about. I'm not going to say who they are, but we all know who they are. And I'd like to get like your reaction on that. Like when you see the professionalism or sometimes lack thereof from some of these outlets, like does that kind of like bother you as a journalist? Do you feel like some of these outlets are almost in a way tarnishing our reputation?
Yeah, it bothers me in the sense that there are so many outlets that are exactly like the unnamed one that you mentioned, where they're getting access that the people who are reputable, well, like I would say you and several other people, putting myself into that category as well, that wish we had the access that they did. So I think it just goes to show how some promotions, like that sort of thing, because it gives them more attention when quite frankly it should be about the outlet and the journalist reporting the story and making sure that they do a good job. And I think, avoiding the dirty side is, just not falling for things that aren't true. If an MMA Instagram account was just created a week ago and they start putting out fight news, like, fact check it, make sure it's reputable. If it's being reported by several mainstream names like Ariel Helwani, like Alex Behunin, like Nolan King, like Dylan Rush, quite frankly, like myself, then it's more than likely legitimate. If it's someone who, is just starting in the space and is trying to get clicks and is trying to build a follower account, there's a good chance that the answer to that question is probably no, and that you shouldn't trust them. So I think it's just really knowing who the main sources are to go to, which I think is, kind of hard to notice if you aren't an MMA purist or a combat sports purist, where you kind of have to know who the reputable sources are going into it, versus like the NFL, there's like There's tons of them. NBA, same thing. MMA and boxing, it's a little bit more of a niche thing. So you kind of got to know, who the main points of contact are before you really start breaking news and giving people credit and that sort of thing. So
I think that there's an art and science to a good story. Um, and I think like every individual has their own spin on like what those ingredients are. And I'd love to ask, like, in your opinion, if we had to like break down any piece of journalism that you've put out there, any story that you've ever put your name on, what are some of the key ingredients that make a good story in your opinion?
well, yeah, I mean, you have to have a lead. You have to, draw people in as to why the story is important, and then you're not graph giving people the background info so they know, okay, this is so and so, this is where they're, let's take MMA for example, this is so and so, this is their record, this is where they're fighting out of. They've won 5 out of their last 7. They fought in these reputable promotions. They've won a title in such and such division, and now they're looking to, take that next step. And then maybe it's, supplementing that with quotes, saying that, oh, their training camp is going well, and that, they switch gyms and they have a brand new nutritionist, and that nutritionist has really helped them manage their weight. And then maybe they go into, let's say it's a UFC fighter making their debut. You ask them like, okay, like, what's it going to feel like when your foot touches that canvas and you're actually a part of the UFC, or you're a part of Bellator, getting those anecdotes out of them that you can't find anywhere else. Because the one thing that's always going to remain in journalism for as long as it exists, there's actually, in my opinion, 2 things. It's always going to be facts and how the subject feels. And you won't be able to get how they feel unless you actually talk to them. So
Yeah, I completely agree. If there's any new person that hasn't broken into the field yet, and they're watching the interview I'm doing with you, and they're thinking like, wow, like this sounds like really cool. This sounds like something that I would want to like endeavor and be a part of in some way, shape, or form. Maybe it's going to the event and taking photos, or maybe it's starting up their own podcast, or maybe it's doing MMA picks with a friend. Like, do you have some like just some generic advice that you would give anybody who's looking to kind of like break into this?
oh, absolutely. I mean, the first thing you got to do is, and I think I could speak for you and several other MMA media members in the space. We all get into this because we're fans of it. So first, you have to somewhat be a fan of it if you want to get into it. Because if you're not immersed in the sport and you see it, and you start covering it with a blind eye, and you don't know at least some of the ins and outs as to how the business works, you're going to get left behind, because there are going to be things that you don't know that the guy or girl, for that matter, who is your age, that's been watching the sport for a couple years, knows. Well, that's the big thing. You gotta educate yourself on how the sport works first. Then you can start to really see, okay, where do I think I can fit in? The easy thing about getting into the space is there's no barrier to entry. You don't have to be a journalism student to do this. It certainly helped. It's helped hone my skills. But at the time the summer is over, all 2 journalism degrees. But my point in saying that is, you don't need a journalism degree to be successful. It certainly does help, because it helps you, earn and gain the skills of how, to properly write a story and source and all of that. But you can easily learn that through, pitching yourself to certain sites. The good thing is that all of these MMA sites, they're always looking for people to write. So if you can get on with a site that, they have a good vision, and they cover all the different promotions, and, they equal the playing field, and, let you pitch stories, and they give you stories, and they let you contribute on fight picks. I think it's just one of those things where you got to start. If you don't have a Twitter, make a Twitter, start following all the major MMA accounts. You never know. Oh, maybe one of them will catch wind that, like, okay, hey, this is somebody new in the space. MMA Twitter is, even though it's a really small bubble, it's really easy. You make a Twitter account, and 5 or 6 days later, you're in an MMA Twitter group chat. So it's not hard to start out. You just have to really start. And I think another big thing and this is something that several MMA journalists have said over the years, most famously James Lynch, is finding a niche, find someone that nobody else does. Is it scouting prospects? I did that for several years for Fansided MMA, and now they're some of the biggest names in the sport. Is it really breaking down fights and breaking down analytics and statistics? Is that your thing? Is MMA betting your thing? Or MMA picks your thing? Just finding what your niche is and being really good at it is really the big thing, and try to find something that nobody else is doing.
What is one piece of your work that you're exceptionally proud of? Like of all the articles that you put out in the MMA space, is there one that like sticks out in your brain as like one that you're most proud of?
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to look back and say that, this is a couple years ago now, but when I was covering content the week of the Conor McGregor Dustin Poirier 3 fight, I mean, that was something where, I never thought that, even though I wasn't credentialed for that event and I went as a fan, like I thought, like, wow, this is really cool. Like I can make some of this, a centerpiece of a portfolio. And then when I, went to my first Bellator event and I got a chance to talk to, Usman Nurmagomedov, and I got to speak to Daniel James before he became the Daniel James of today, like things like that, just being able to be on the inside. But if you were to ask me about one piece, I think this is more so combat sports related. When I was given the opportunity to collaborate with PBS to do a piece on Muhammad Ali before his documentary came out, and being able to screen that before it officially came out is one of my proudest moments as a combat sports journalist. Being able to write about the ways he was ahead of his time as an athlete is something that I'll always cherish, and it's a part of my portfolio that I keep with me greatly, just because I thought it was some of my best work, and B, being able to really analyze his whole career and understand what a fixture he was to not just the sport of boxing but society in general was easily my proudest work as a combat sports journalist, if you will. MMA specifically, it would probably have to be something either UFC 264, like I said, or my first ever Bellator event. I was pretty proud of that coverage too.
Yeah, and speaking of Bellator, I'm hoping we can like shift gears a little bit and talk more MMA news. I'd love to pick your brain about Bellator MMA. I know that there's going to be a card in Chicago here pretty soon. Is there a fight or two that's on that card that you're interested in?
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm excited for the whole card. The whole card's great. The main event and is awesome, but just being able to see the local flavor, being able to say that I covered back-to-back Corey Anderson fights, and two out of Daniel James's last 3 fights is super cool. I just think what Bellator does really well with cards like the one in Chicago is really just, immersing themselves in the local fighter, the guy from Indiana, the guy from Wisconsin, the guy from Chicago, a guy that, the crowd can really get behind. And I bet you a lot of people didn't know who Daniel James was before the Tyrell Fortune knockout. And after the Tyrell Fortune knockout, they definitely knew who he was. And then the Marcelo Gom knockout was a cherry on top. So I think that, a card like that where you have so much Chicago talent and Daniel James is one of the main attractions is only going to make that card feel really big. And then especially if he wins, moving one step closer to a heavyweight title shot is huge, because as you probably know well, Illinois is not an MMA hotbed. Or to see someone from my state, quite frankly, be as successful and be in the heavyweight top 5 is pretty cool. And I just think, Bellator does a good job of really spreading the wealth and, really, kind of letting their promotion shine through and going to all of these different territories. That's something else I wanted to mention too. If you're an aspiring MMA media member or just starting out in the MMA space, a little hint for everyone: Bellator credentials everyone. And when I say everyone, then they literally credential everyone. They could probably credential you if they really wanted to. They want as much media covering their events as possible, because they know that they are the number 2 promotion in the world. And the more exposure they get, the better it is for them and the more media they want included. So just a little tidbit: if you want to start out and you want to cover a big, MMA event to start your media journey, which is what I did, Bellator is a very suitable option.
Couldn't agree with you more. Let's talk a little. Let's talk more broadly about Bellator. Of course, the big piece of news with Bellator is the fact. Now, whether you want to call it a fact or just simply a rumor, we've heard time and time again about the PFL potentially acquiring Bellator for a lot of different reasons. There are some journalists that are flat out saying, nope, it's never going to happen. There are other journalists that are saying it's only going to be a matter of time. It definitely is going to happen. Are you in one camp or the other on that debate?
Yeah, I'd say never. I think it would be a match made in heaven. I mean, the PFL is their ESPN deal. They just got Francis. It's we're just added a flyweight division. I mean, you want to talk about competing with the UFC? That's one way to do it. And I think a lot of their values, are very much alike. And I think it's something that, if it does happen, it's going to be major news. But I would say never on that because, as I said, I think Don Davis and Scott Coker, I could see them working very well together. Bellator has some divisions that the PFL doesn't have. The PFL has the super fight division, which Bellator doesn't have. I think it makes a lot of sense monetarily, and B, from a network perspective, being able to combine forces, you could either have an exclusive deal with ESPN or you could have an exclusive deal with Showtime. So it really kind of depends, but I think there's a good chance in the next few years, in my opinion, that match is sooner rather than later. It's just going to be a matter of how are they going to market it and what major fighters are they going to sign over the next few years to make it a little bit more buzzable. Because I think if they can get the right names from a crossover perspective into PFL/Bellator, it would be huge. If they snatch up another UFC champion that the UFC doesn't think, is giving them big business, like an Aljamain Sterling, for example, who the UFC's been on the outs with for quite some time, you could see some very major shifts in MMA that we would have not expected maybe 5 or 6 years ago. So I would say never.
There is a very interesting scenario taking place currently in the PFL season, and it has to do with Kayla Harrison. And a lot of the speculation this year was Cyborg was going to fight her on a PFL pay-per-view card at the end of this year. And I think a lot of us in the media just kind of presumed that was like the fight that was eventually going to happen. Kayla's not fighting in the PFL regular season format right now. They're saving her. I naturally assumed it was to fight Cyborg. Cyborg, of course, ends up re-upping with Bellator. And as of this recording, and today is May 29th, 2023, as of this recording, there aren't any it doesn't appear that a merger is like going to be happening between now at the end of 2023. I think that's a fair statement to make. I'm bringing this up because Kayla Harrison, do you feel like PFL kind of pushed their chips in the table like this was going to happen? They were going to figure out a way to get a fight with Cyborg done, and now that's not coming to fruition. What do they do with her?
Yeah, I mean, I think anyone who knows anything about that whole situation, if you will, knows that Kayla Harrison has always wanted a big money fight. And for as Cyborg is that big money fight, it's just a matter of can they come to an agreement. And truly, I think it's only a matter of time before the fight happens. I think it has to happen. The big issue is Kayla Harrison's comfortable at 145. Is she comfortable at 135? Can they find a happy medium? Because if they can't, and they can only do it at a catch weight, for in like a non-title scenario, I don't think it would go well for anyone. So I think it's a matter of coming to terms, with the contract and seeing, okay, how can we make this the biggest fight possible? And yeah, I do think PFL is trying to put all of its eggs in one basket. And I think they're realizing that the longer they wait, the worse it is, because you and I both know that in the next several months, Chris Cyborg will compete. And if she does not win her fight after her contract is re-upped, the whole thing is going to blow up in smoke. So the PFL is praying that something bad does not happen over on the Bellator side, because I think they want the fight just as much as Bellator and just as much as the fans and media do. So I think it's a matter of, okay, can they get Cyborg the right fight? If they do get her the right fight, you know, like a Carmouche, for example, or something along those lines. Can the fight happen? Sure, it's just a matter of, can the stars align? The question is going to be, if she waits till the fall, the fight's not going to happen this year, and if she fights this summer, then you got to make sure that November is not booked so she can fight in November. But if she waits till the fall to fight, this fight will not be happening until 2024, and it may not happen ever. So they have to play their cards right, and they have to make sure that, the chips fall where they may.
I'd love to get your take on Jake Paul and the Jake Paul signing with PFL in particular. That was announced earlier this year. And, with Jake Paul came that super fight division that you referenced earlier. And now we're at a point where he's getting ready to have a boxing contest against Nathan Diaz. That's going to be happening in Texas later on this summer. In your opinion, what is the path forward with Jake Paul and MMA? He had specifically said before that he will be competing in an actual MMA bout. Is it safe to presume, in your opinion, that when that bout actually does happen, it'll be an amateur bout that happens under the auspices of the PFL?
Yeah, it's a very good question. First off, I think the Jake Paul signing is stupid. Um, and I'll explain why. PFL is trying to consider themselves as a legitimate number two. They got Francis Ngannou, who was the former UFC heavyweight champion. We know the story there, whether they're on the side of, oh, Jones Ngannou should have happened, or they're happy for him. Nonetheless, they got Francis Ngannou. Signing Jake Paul, someone who, in my humble opinion, is not a legitimate boxer, and he's only taking the fights that he wants to take because he knows it gives him the best chance to win. I think PFL needs to be very careful, because they're playing with fire, and if they give Jake Paul someone with legitimate MMA experience, which I don't think they will, it's going to be a disaster. I could think in such a way that if they don't do this correctly, it's going to be just like Kimbo Slice and his Elite XC run. And that's what I worry from a business perspective, that they're not going to be able to get right, is making sure that Jake Paul fights someone he can actually beat. And don't get me wrong, he's a great entertainer. He's made a lot of money, but I don't necessarily like when he competes, just because I think it dumbs down the sport of boxing. And when you get someone with no MMA experience who wants to start a super fight division, yeah, that's great. But at the end of the day, it's who are you going to fight? And you actually have enough early MMA experience to where maybe you think you can win. And I just don't think he has that.
With Jake Paul, pretend you're a PFL shot caller, if you will. What do you do with him? Now that the genie's out of the lamp, he's with the promotion. You have to put something together for him, presumably. What makes sense to you now? Are you grabbing some unknown amateur fighter, or are you trying to find another personality for him to fight? Like, what makes sense from a promotional standpoint in your mind?
I think you got to sign someone who, wins on Dana White Contender Series and doesn't get signed to the UFC, but has a big personality. Or someone with a similar stature of a Bo Nickel, of a Sean O'Malley, of a Terrence McKinney, some kind of that sort, who will fight anyone, anywhere, anytime, but doesn't have years of MMA experience. I think you have to start him with someone who the UFC decided not to take a chance on, and is maybe 2-0, 3-0, 4-0, 5-0, something like that. So you basically have to get the UFC scraps that they don't pick up, in my opinion.
I am of the opinion that for me, a Jake Paul MMA fight has to be an amateur fight. Number one, I don't see it. I don't see how you could do a pro fight. And then number two, I would purposefully create it to where it's a David versus Goliath situation. I'm bringing in some debuting amateur fighter that also doesn't have experience. And just to make it interesting, I'll pluck that fighter from Extreme Couture, Team Alpha Male. Like I'll find like a big gym and I'll grab like a 185-pound prospect and throw him in there and see what he can do. Because I want Jake Paul to win. I spent all this money on Jake Paul, and if I get some Dana White Contender Series washout that comes in and like ruins my plans, I'm gonna be pissed.
Yeah, but for the people who don't like Jake Paul, they would probably be pretty happy. So I think either way, no matter who he fights, I think people are going to tune in.
Yeah, I completely agree. Zan, I had a great time speaking with you this evening. You're very, very knowledgeable, and you literally put out so many helpful pieces of information for anybody who's looking to like come into this. I hope you revisit and rewatch this episode a few times because he said a lot of insightful things. Before I let you go, is there anything that you are working on that you can share with us?
Yeah, so in essence, thank you again for having me on. It was a real pleasure. And just to reintroduce myself, my name is Zain Bando. I'm a freelance MMA journalist for bjpenn.com, and I also host the MMA Outsiders podcast, which airs weekly on the Empty the Bench podcast network. We just moved our episodes to Tuesday mornings at 9 a.m. Eastern, 6 a.m. Pacific because of the Ultimate Fighter. So you can catch all of my combat sports analysis there with my co-host Tom Albano of Fansided MMA. And I guess in terms of what I'm working on, I mean, the big thing coming up for me is Bellator 297 in Chicago. I look to try to interview as many of the men and women on that card as much as I can. But really, you can find all my stuff pretty much weekly, and I just simply cover what I can. I've been covering a bunch of Octagon MMA. They've been great to me so far, and just really whoever needs coverage, I'm always interested in just making sure that the promotion is covered in some way. So in terms of major projects going on, I don't really have one at the moment, but my next big event where you'll see a lot of my work is definitely that June 16th card at Wintrust for Bellator 297.
So, well, Zan, again, I appreciate your time. Thank you for spending it with me, and I look to have you back very, very soon, my friend.
Absolutely. Just so you guys know, so I can plug it, you can follow me across social media, Instagram and Twitter at Zanbando99, ZAINBANDO 99. Zanbando is one word. You can find all of my opinions there. My DMs are always open. If anyone ever needs anything, if anyone wants to either get involved in the space or has advice of which outlets to go to next, et cetera, depending on where you're at, just let me know and I'll do my best to help you. If I don't have the answer, I'm sure someone in my circle does. So if any of you want to get in touch with me, I'm always available. And truly, I just love what I do, and I'm more than happy to help out anyone who's interested.